interacting with each other is really where the conflict of this movie lies. I mean, the creature is a threat, but is not a conflict. The conflict is their character interactions and how dangerous they are to themselves and to each other, and what Jen needs to do to survive that conflict.
I said it before and I'll say it again. Life moves pretty fast. You don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it.
Never fear change. Life is too short for fear. Chase what is desired.
I can do this all day.
Would you mind identifying what you are?
We're the best friends squad.
That's what we call ourselves. Sort of like a team.
Welcome to the rodeo. Ladies and gentlemen, please sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride.
This is the way.
I have spoken.
Welcome to the Skippy and Fanty Show at the movies.
Sweetheart, this is the place that Truman wanted to go to?
Nice. Nice little reference there, Paul. A+.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm Sean.
I'm Paul.
And you may recognize that it's Paul,
Hi.
who has not been here for a bit. He did come in for a Torture Cinema a little while back. Thank you, Paul.
Yep.
But now you're here, and you're here the day before you go on vacation to the Hellmouth in America. Not the one that people have been seeing on the news, the other one that was there first.
I'm not sure that characterizing Utah as a hellmouth is kind to our Utah listeners. We must have some Utah listeners, so I
I
apologize.
didn't say all of Utah is a Hellmouth. I just said parts of it are.
I'm not going to the parts of the hellmouth.
Oh, you're not going to the Hellmouth? Why not?
Because I don't want to get coronavirus.
I thought that you called up to be a Slayer's attendant.
Sorry, thank you for playing.
No, you didn't? Oh, well, this is really unfortunate and awkward.
Well, I'm sorry. Those who are expecting me to be a Slayer's attendant are going to be vaguely disappointed.
Oh, well, that's unfortunate. You would be good at it, though, because you would totally get into, lots of old books in, Latin.
Oh, absolutely. I know enough Latin. I mean, I knew enough Latin to translate stuff while I was wandering around Rome, so I think I could handle being a Slayer's attendant.
Oh my god, Paul, your nerd cred just went up way high.
I was trying to manage the Latin by the Italian that I was getting by basically reversing the Latin and adding Spanish to try to figure out the Italian I was dealing with, because I don't know Italian. It didn't always work so well, but because there's no Latin for next stop on a subway, but that's where the Spanish came in.
Ah, okay. Well, perfect. Well, we're here to talk about a film that you probably figured out from the tagline, a film called Sweetheart, which came out in 2019 through Blumhouse Productions, directed by J.D. Dillard. This is a survival horror film, and I'm giving Paul the honor of giving us the, I think, especially brief synopsis, given what this film is actually about, before we dive into our general impressions. So, Paul, what is Sweetheart about?
Okay, Sweetheart is about Jennifer Jen Remming, who washes up on a small tropical island, which happens to be in Fiji, hence the tagline, with her friend Brad. Unfortunately, her friend Brad isn't doing great.
No.
I mean, he's wounded. He dies quickly after, and while Jen is exploring the small tropical island, she finds some stuff showing that people were once there, and after she buries Brad's corpse, which is a very moving and tight scene, something apparently the next morning dug it up and savagely mutilated and ate the corpse. Things move on, and she explores her environment. She finds a weird hole in the ocean floor, which is very Cthulhu-like. And then that evening, she fails to signal a plane and finds out there's a monster that's coming out of the hole every night trying to attack her. This part of the movie is basically trying to survive the night and figure out a way off during the day. This equilibrium is punctuated when a couple of her friends also wash up on the island, and they don't believe her for reasons, and so they don't want to get off the island. They just want to stay there and get eaten by the monster, and well, the monster obliges. Finally, Jen decides that enough is enough, and Jen goes mano a mano with the monster with the help of fire, sticks, and gritty determination, and finally manages to dispatch the frankly terrifying half-man, half-shark thing that's been terrorizing her and her friends all this time. She
I'm
cuts off
amused,
its head to make sure it's dead. She's
which A
dead
plus.
serious to make sure it's like she does not mess around.
So I think what's interesting, Paul, is I was really setting you up for like possibly the shortest synopsis of a film ever, which literally would just be a young woman ends up stranded on an island in the middle of nowhere, and there might be something scary there. And you went with, I'm going to give you the whole story.
Yeah, it's been a while, listeners, but I'm back.
Well, I think it goes without saying that from a premise perspective, this is a pretty straightforward survival horror story.
Well, I disagree. There's three things going on here. There's survival, there's the horror survival, and there's also the character drama because her relationship with her friends is a very fraught one that extends from before the movie, informing how she deals with Lucas and Mia, and
Sure.
and it go- and that drives the last part of the movie when Jen and them have to basically face the creature. I mean, I didn't mention at one point they do try to escape on the raft, and this goes badly.
Very badly. Yeah, and you're right. I guess what I would say is like the beginning of this film is very simple in its presentation of what's happening, and it gets this complexity when these other elements come into play, which I think is what really surprised me. And if I'm giving a general reaction here, I was about to be underwhelmed right up until some of these other elements came into play. And I realized there was a lot more going on here than the beginning makes it seem. And this is not to say that the beginning is poorly crafted or directed or acted or any of that. It is very well done for what it's doing. But the beginning to me, on its own, the beginning half, really doesn't feel like it's doing anything super unique up until these other elements come into play, especially specifically when other survivors show up. And that adds in an element of complexity that I think this film is really benefited by.
And yeah, those first minutes. I mean, they're beautiful and well done cinematographically. I mean, the island is beautiful. We have good focus on her and showing her doing her thing and dealing with stuff at night and during the day. But it is it's a story we've seen before. Okay, single survivor on an island. It felt pedestrian's not the word. It felt straightforward, but not only do we have other survivors show up, but survivors she has connections with and past relationships with, which immediately drop us into this character drama. It's not we don't go through the fumbling of, oh, should I trust this person? Do I know this person? They all know each other, and surprise, they don't get along. And there's other interesting bits there that are leaving the audience to figure out because Jen never says anything, like the fact that when she sees the blood in the raft, she comes to a rather startling conclusion that they killed somebody else or at least dealt with somebody. So, but it's never really discussed or brought up. But Jen clearly sees it, and the audience clearly see it, and so we have to focus that into like, okay, these people are treating Jen poorly and really not liking her and not trusting her, and that leads to tragedy. But they themselves are no angels. What did they do? Did they kill this person? Did the person die? They're just not talking about it. It's a very interesting nuance to this, makes this relationship even more fraught between the three of them. So that makes it understandable when, for example, Jen decides to try to steal the raft. Like, in retrospect, it makes sense because these two people are not exactly, she knows them, but they're not exactly her friends.
I mean, keep in mind, like, one of them is supposed to be her boyfriend.
I couldn't quite figure out how that actually was supposed to work. I thought Brad was at first, but
that's what it seemed like to me. And it's one thing I appreciate about this film is it does not straight up tell us everything, because it doesn't make sense for this film to tell us everything, because most of this film is one person on, and occasionally the shark mutant man, but it's basically one person on an island by themselves, just doing stuff, not talking to us, right? Only towards the end, when she's alone again, she starts to write in the diary, do we get more narration from her. For the most part, it's very silent in the sense that there is sound, but there's not a lot of talking. going on. So later when we start to get like the little bits of mystery, I appreciate that the film doesn't feel like it has to explain everything to us, and it lets us figure things out on our own. And some things I think are a little bit ambiguous and some things are not as ambiguous. Like, but the one example you're giving, which is they mention this other man who we never see, just a name, and I can't remember what his name is. And they say like something happened with him, and we don't know what it was. He yelled at them. We don't know, but whatever it is, it's clearly shaken them. And then she finds this blood, and on the knife first, a little bit of blood on the knife, and then a little bit inside the actual raft.
Mhm.
And it doesn't sit there and say, "Oh, let's have the confrontation point of having her and Lucas confront each other," right? In which they have to admit they had to make a horrible choice, perhaps. Maybe they went through a boat dilemma, where there's not enough water, but you have too many mouths to feed. It doesn't do that, but it makes it very clear that something happened on that boat that, on one hand, is probably they murdered him. It seems the most likely, or at the very least, he was seriously injured and then either died and they dealt with him in the way that they had to or something, but most likely they murdered him.
That's my interpretation. Is yeah that there was. I mean, because the blood on a knife implies that there was an active component to his death by them, not that he was dying along with them and they just dumped him into the ocean and decided not to talk about it. How and why that occurred, we're not told, and it's really not important as far as those details. It's just enough to color our perceptions and what we know of Lucas and Mia, and so we can so that points the sympathies back towards Jen, because I mean Jen does act out when they cause like say we got to get off this island, and they're saying chill the bleep out. We're tired and hungry and not doing great, and they straight out don't believe her, which again that pulls that character drama of like, so what is entirely that history? I mean, they say that you lied before, like we're not told, we don't have to be told. It's just that Jen apparently has a history with them of not being truthful, but on the other hand, they're clearly not great people. So maybe it's on them more than on her, because as far as we know, she acts, aside from stealing their raft, she acts in a straightforward and upright manner. I mean, she says, we got to get off the island, get off the island. The monster here, you don't want to be here. The only thing she really does wrongs per se is try to steal the raft, in which case then they tie her up, and then of course the monster comes and bad things happen.
Well, it's interesting to me that when I was watching this, the second her friend showed up, I noticed immediately there's a real stark difference between them. She's the only black person in the entire film. It's her voice that we've gotten to watch. So we know everything she's telling them is true because we've seen it. And it's the white people who don't want to believe her when she tells them very directly and very clearly, as you point out, what's going on and they need to leave. They all think that she's gone bananas and don't want to believe her. And that gets even more stark when her supposed boyfriend really digs into her while she's tied up, where he's like, "What are you going to do? You're just going to be broke. Where's your money going to come from? I pay for your whole life." It's really kind of toxic what he's saying.
Yeah, it is very, very cruel and demeaning and othering and making her less than human. I did appreciate basically the trope was that, yeah, she's the only person of color and she's the one that survives. She's final girl, which I
She
appreciate
is,
it.
but as you mentioned before, right? She does the thing that you don't often see in a lot of horror films, which is like what usually when you get your last jump scare, which is they like walk away and they think that they've killed the monster, and then the monster they think they're safe, and then the monster shows up again. But she actually bends down and like cuts the damn thing's head off, and is like,
it's such a visceral and meaty and muscular moment. I like the word muscular because she's like sitting there cutting, and like she's grunting. I mean, it's not like she's cutting with a katana. It's like sleeving off. She has to work at it, and we're right there as a viewer watching her vent her frustrations and her determination to end this threat by very strong, violent action to make sure, yes, it's dead, it's not coming back.
it's a very interesting sort of take on just in general on this idea of the survival horror, especially like the survival horror on, a remote island. We have various different kinds of takes on this, where someone gets stuck on an island. Sometimes they're horror stories and sometimes they're just people struggling against the elements. But in this, when it adds those other elements, it just really takes this film to a next level. That I've just really, really, really appreciated. I also really appreciate that the main character, they're not behaving in ways that don't make sense. They're behaving in ways that make total sense given the situation, right? Like her immediate response is not, to think that nothing is going on or to, act all strange. It's to say, oh, I'm stuck on this island. I need to figure out how to survive. It's to try to figure out what's really happening when she realizes there's something else on the island, right? What is it? Try to get information. Then when the friends show up, it's like, okay, we have a raft now. We have a means of getting out of here. We need to leave. It's all of these things that are very, very logical, even while she's dealing with like the emotional turmoil. Like the beginning of this film, or like one of her presumably close friends he dies it kind of horribly.
And while she wasn't even there, I mean, she leaves him still alive to go circle the island. When she comes back, he's dead. That's emotionally fraught and devastating to her, and we see that.
Yeah, and immediately after that, right, this image of his body the day after, right, his body being ripped out of the sand and torn apart by the shark monster, whatever it is.
True. I mean, consider the final confrontation where she basically sets half the island on fire to set up the conflict with the creature in order to kill it. It's beautifully done. The fight in the fire is very well, really so shot, and it's smart. It's like, okay, this is a water creature that comes out of the water to kill. I mean, she doesn't use fire directly, but it's a nice backdrop and a nice way to basically help pent up the creature and provide a framework to kill it. And it's shown as not being easy. It's a long, drawn out, visceral struggle to kill this thing, with reverses and basically determination getting her through, which I appreciate. I mean, it's a conflict with raised stakes and lots of effort on her part, and the cinematography and the director make sure that you feel every inch of that battle, that you're with her through it.
Yeah, it's interesting because this is another thing that I appreciated, that the monster in this very clearly naturally stronger than they are, and is, it's a water-based creature, so it is in fact more agile in the water. It has all of these features that are like innate to it. So there is this raised stakes, as you say, right, in terms of just the physicality required here, but it's also a physicality that it doesn't feel supernatural, even though this monster is a thing that, as far as I know, there are no shark, half man things that live in a black hole in the sea.
I mean, it's kind of, I think where the director or the writer was going with is they were kind of waving in the direction of the Cthulhuoid mythos. I mean, it's not quite a deep one because deep ones generally aren't interested in eating people, but it's that same sort of land and water based creature, except this one's a lot more feral and inhuman for it. It's not an intelligent creature living in the bottom of the sea. It's a creature that comes up and eats and kills people and things. I mean, it's smart and sensitive enough to, and indiscriminate enough to dig something out of a body out of the sand in order to eat it. I mean, there's got to be plenty of fish in that sea, because we see her get fish again and again, and they roast and they eat it. So it's acting with desire and senses to do these sorts of things. I'm not sure we can ascribe emotions or intelligence to it beyond anything animal, so it's not quite a deep one, but that's the feeling I was getting, because that big hole that she sees in the ocean where it's coming out of kind of reminds me of the hole from the movie Dagon. Have you seen Dagon?
I have not.
Okay, you should see Dagon. It's a movie set off the coast of Spain. It's basically a version of the story of Innsmouth, because the name of the town that they go to is Imboca, which is Spanish for in the mouth. So there's a giant hole that the main character keeps dreaming that he's swimming down into, and then at the end of the movie, he swims down into this endless deep hole with another of the characters. So I kept thinking, oh God, does that lead down to Dagon? When I was reading this, when I was watching this.
Oh, interesting. I mean, it is. What's interesting to me is so like this creature is it's intelligent enough, but it is also very. You use the word feral,
Hmm.
and it's very. It's almost like creature from the Black Lagoon. It's got this very human quality to it, but because it is so violent, it can't be reasoned with. It does not. It has no reason to listen to people, right? And people have no reason to speak to it. It really has one function, hunger. It just needs to feed. But at the same time, they do some really interesting stuff here with it. Yes, it's a monster and it's kind of this shark-like man creature, but it also like some really good sound work done with it with some of its chittering that it makes. It makes
Hmm.
these really unique sounds that they do such a good job with, especially as they're introducing it. And this is another thing I really appreciate that Diller did here, which is slowly reveal the monster?
Right, because I mean, I think it's almost like Brad's last words is, "Did you see it?" You left it as if you were saying, "See what?" And then we find out, yeah. So that's the tiny little clue at the beginning that there's something out there, but it's like listen, and you miss it, and then it's slowly revealed what this is and what it's doing. I mean, as the movie goes on, we get to see more and more of it, and get to see it, especially in that underwater fight scene with the raft. We get to see it in its full and unvarnished glory.
Yeah.
It's in its element, and Jen finds out, yeah, this is not the place to fight it,
No, not at all.
which then dovetails later to the fight in the fire, which is definitely Jen on much better trained in terms in dealing with something that's stronger and more powerful than her. She changes the board, as it were, in order to get that advantage enough to be able to kill it.
Yeah, I will say my favorite shot of this creature is actually the shot with the flare gun when she sees a plane flying over and she goes to, in the night.
Oh yeah, and it raises.
And it's the
Yes, that was
first time we get like a full silhouette of it, and that gave me chills because it's such a beautiful shot of it in red in the sea, the silhouette of this creature. You still don't quite know what it is, but it's man-like, but also not. And it's such a great moment when that, and then she runs and she has this first time we really hear this creature and the first time that we really know what it's capable of and how big it is based on the sounds that it makes. This is in a lot of ways, like, even though I think that this film could have had more to it, more meat, it does such a good job with its runtime of making sure we have some really memorable shots.
I mean, that early beginning is a slow burn. So listeners, if you're going to go see the movie, and I do recommend it, I think Sean will agree with me. Be patient with it, because it is that taffy pull at the beginning, but then as things ramp up, it curves up to the hitting character drama, and then the violent conflicts between Jen and the creature culminating with the battle and the fire, and burning down half the island in order to kill the thing. So I mean, once that thing ramps up, the movie doesn't have any little flab or flat or flabbiness to it. It's lean and mean, and doesn't outstay its welcome. It does what it. I don't even remember what the runtime is, but I was never. Once things get moving, I was never really bored with it. I mean, it's 82 minutes, so it's a short movie.
Yeah, it's pretty short. It's a thing where it's like as a feature film, I feel like it doesn't work quite as a feature film, but it does feel to me like, I mean, it doesn't fit the oeuvre of Black Mirror, but it makes me think of like an anthology episode from like a horror show that's like a Black Mirror horror show. Because to me, it's got just enough meat in it that it seems to fit within that kind of framework, but doesn't quite meet what I would consider to be the runtime of a traditional feature film.
Yeah, it's a little short for. I mean, it's not as short as, say, Men in Black 2, which is about the shortest feature film I ever saw. That was like not even 80 minutes, but
Really?
but yeah, Men in Black 2 is like is one of the shortest feature films I've ever seen. But yeah, so it feels like an extended Black Mirror episode. That's a good way of putting it. And that includes a lot of credits. So
Yeah, this doesn't have a
like,
lot of credits. It should be noted because there are, what, 4 actors in this film?
yeah, and not endless, and endless stuff about CGI and stuff. So yeah, so in terms of actual story we get on the screen, they're about comparable, but this movie feels a lot more suited to its running time, which is, as you say, not quite feature length film. Whereas Men in Black 2 clearly is missing an entire act, in my opinion.
Yeah, Men in Black 2, I could see that because of just the amount of components that are going on there because it's a more I'm using this carefully, but more complicated narrative, whereas this is it's not because the mystery here it's not trying to like solve the what is the creature mystery or who are the people that were here before who died
Before,
mystery.
yeah.
Like it gives us bits and pieces, but we're not trying to solve those. And it's also not like Castaway, where like part of the story needs to be what happens after he gets back. This story isn't about that because the conclusion of this is her defeating the monster, presumably getting in the raft or something and surviving. But that's not necessarily like the survival is just surviving the monster.
It's not even clear. It's not even clear or even, dare I say, necessary that she survived. We don't see. I mean, we just see her that last nice wide shot of her walking away from the bonfire on the island or along the
With
beach.
its head,
That's
carrying its
with
head.
its head, with its head. Yes, I mean, she has her trophy, her proof, as it were, which ties in the whole thing. Oh, people don't believe her. It's like, well, they'll believe her now when she has a decaying head of an impossible creature. People will believe her that it was real.
Yeah.
Presumably, the fire will bring planes because we've seen a plane, and the plane might have missed the flare gun, but this giant bonfire will attract attention. So I think she'll escape, but it's not stated, and really we don't need to know that. I mean, we don't need a coda of her with a press conference holding up the head. That's not the point of this movie. The point of this movie is about her being able to survive against something much more violent and dangerous than herself, and surviving despite the social problems she has with the other two survivors. Overcoming that social what's what I'm looking for? That social conflict. So she's got the physical conflict with the creature and the social conflict with Mia and Lucas that she has to overcome.
Right.
And the movie is very minimalist on both ends as far as where that comes from and what that's doing. But the point of this movie is that she is a determined survivor. She's not the strongest or the fastest. She's the most determined to survive, and that's what sometimes human cussedness is what got us where we are today as a species, and that's what she epitomizes.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that when her friends do show up, this is where like yeah, the monster is the overarching conflict in the sense that it is the obstacle that needs to be overcome for basic survival. But the thing that's the real conflict here is with her friends, because the
Mm-hmm.
monster it is a difficult right problem to solve because it's big and powerful and it can cut you and it comes at night and it's scary and it's creepy, but it is an obstacle that has a clear like I know what I need to do. I either need to hide from it or kill it, and those are like your two options. It's very simple. But her friends are presenting conflict that doesn't have easy solutions, right? Like, how does she make her friends believe her? Her friends already are predisposed because of their history to think that she might be making stuff up. Her friends talk to her as though she's the problem in all of their relationship, right? The way that Lucas talks to her about how she doesn't appear to be happy even though they did this big trip with everybody, and like his quest is not what is making you unhappy and how can I help you find that happiness? It's only about you are taking the joy from other people and you're unhappy and that's a problem that is irrational. And so in her relationship with these characters, they've just added this dynamic of well, they're complicated. I can't just simply say, you know, there's an A or a B solution to this. This is like a sea of solutions with tons of different possible exit points. Whereas with the monster, there's not. There is either you survive another night, or you kill it one night, or you die. Those are really all you got. But with her friends, it can go any number of ways. And added in the thing we mentioned before, right? The fact that they may very well have killed somebody, that makes it even more potentially complicated because now her friends, and we have good reason in the film to think that they may be perfectly capable of it, her friends may have killed somebody. And when Mia actually smacks her in the head with an oar, while she's trying to escape, that gives us a very big clue that her friends are not normal.
And they tie her up, and yeah, and that precipitates, yeah, her being helpless when the monster does come. I mean, you've played Powered by the Apocalypse games, correct, in role playing?
Nope.
You haven't. Okay, so Powered by Apocalypse games, Apocalypse World being the most known example, are games that have are usually set in a bad place, but the strength of those games is how the characters relate to each other and how they interact with each other, and the games drive character conflict more than conflict with the outside world or conflict with other things. It's the internal relationships between characters that really make that game come alive. And this could be a Powered by Apocalypse scenario, having these characters, because we have an external conflict and an external problem in the shark creature, but really it's these three characters, because poor Brad doesn't survive the first few minutes of the film, interacting with each other is really where the conflict of this movie lies. I mean, the creature is a threat, but is not a conflict. The conflict is their character interactions and how dangerous they are to themselves and to each other, and what Jen needs to do to survive that conflict.
It's really telling, I think, about this film where the conflict really arises. Because to me, one of the things that really stuck out is Jen. The reason they try to tie her up is not because Jen is especially violent. She does kick Mia in the face. I would argue that Mia deserved it, but she kicks her in the face because they're trying to stop her from leaving the island, even though she has explained to them calmly and not calmly that it's extremely dangerous to stay there. They need to leave as quickly as possible. And Mia decides immediately that the appropriate reaction here is not, let's try to restrain her, perhaps. It's, let me bash you over the head with an oar, potentially giving you a severe concussion, which, given they don't have medical supplies, could potentially kill her, right? It's immediately to resort to violence. To restrain, and I think the optics we can't ignore, to have two white people restrain a black woman who we know for a fact is being truthful, and they are trying to convince us and her that no, she's out of her gourd, and it's her fault. She's the problem, not them. And to me, that image, just really bore into my head, just given this last year of just having this woman who's trying to be heard and is not being heard, and then when she decides she's going to take matters in her own hand that only affect her, the reaction is not, well, I'll just let her go, let her go her own way. It's, we need to restrain, we need to be violent, we need to hold you back. And that, I just don't, it's hard to watch that film in light of the last few years and not see that optical choice there.
Yeah, I think the director who also co-wrote the movie is definitely making a deliberate visual representation of what's going on in our society today with that sort of choice. And I mean, given the minimalist of the movie, doesn't have to say it aloud. We just have to draw it from what we see from on the film and make those associations and connections.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really, if I were to be totally honest, man, this film is really interesting, for what it is doing with a very simple concept, and it does it extremely well, which I think is an important thing to note, because, lesser directors and lesser crews could certainly make a far less compelling version of this story.
A much more hashy, slashy, gory fest of the focusing on the monster rather than Jen as a character and Jen's relationship with Lucas and Mia.
Yeah. Part of that is too, that the monster is more omnipresent. It's sort of this thing that's always there and is the looming threat. But it's a threat that we only dwell on because it's the thing that she has to deal with, not because the film wants us to focus on the monster over and over and over again. In excruciating detail. I mean, even the gore here is pretty low key. I mean, there's some gruesomeness. There's a half body. It's been torn apart. That is here, and there is the dead is Brad, I believe, who's dead. Who gets There's some blood, and there's a little bit of blood here or there, but there's not a lot of focus on the viscera, the gore. It's much more focused on the character dynamic and its relationship to the monster, but not necessarily on the terror of the monster through gore or through really really explicit demonstrations of force in ways that you might see in like a slasher fic where we're seeing the weapons being used in much more visceral ways. Yes, the monster does cut people up here and there's blood, but it's the terror of it, I think, is partly because it's this otherworldly creature that reminds us of ourselves just a little bit, but is also still just alien enough, but also can't be reasoned with. Because it has no relation to it. We're not related to it. We don't even know what it is. It's just a half shark man monster.
Yeah, its taxonomy is beside the point. And as you point out, this is not a splatterpunk movie. It's not. Yes, there is shown violence and the blood and the half torn man, but it's not lingering. Almost, it's not fetishizing that those violence, that destruction, that bodily harm. It's not. That's not it. That's not what the movie's trying to do. It's not making that the focus. It's just it's just what's happening to her and what it did, rather than just like lingering shots and the loving detail that you get in splatterpunk. That this movie is not about that at all. I mean, there's lovely cinematography here, the island, the fights in the dark. I mentioned the fight in the fire, but the movie's not doing that with the violence and the gore. It's not trying to glamorize the violence and the splatterpunk.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. There is a lot of beautiful cinematography here. I gotta applaud them because this is, they used one filming location, which is one of the islands by Fiji. That basically doesn't rely a lot on CG. I think they have to have some special effects, and I doubt they got approval to light an entire island on fire. So that's probably some special effects there. But even the monster is practical effects, with some exceptions of some shots that I think are pretty clearly CG, but they do it in the dark, so you kind of don't really see it, and that's just when they need it to be moving around really fast. But they're very clever, even still, not to rely on that for everything. So they use clever shooting when they need her to be close to the monster in a fight, for example, or they need the monster to be doing something. They're careful not to always try to show the monster in full frame, so that we only get glimpses and pieces of it at a time, so that we can't focus too much on the fact that it's probably a man in like some sort of alien suit with some animatronics on it. It's very well done for the amount of components that are here, and it's something that if I were to give a general reaction, it would be that I just really appreciated how much attention was given to making this feel more real rather than falling on what I would say is a thing that films fall on sometimes, which is trying to do too much. And this doesn't. It does just enough. And that to me, totally worth the free entry price because it's a Netflix subscription.
But there's also time. Is it worth the 90 minutes of your time to watch this movie? Absolutely. Go ahead. If you have any interest in horror films, especially BIPOC horror films, this is a movie that you'll want to go watch.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think this is well worth seeing. It's a film I had never heard of, and when I went into it, I was like, oh, okay, this is going to be interesting, I guess. And then the monster came, I was like, oh, okay, like, well, maybe that's all it's going to be. She's going to fight the monster. It's like, oh, wait, her friend showed up. And I remember my reaction on Twitter was, these goddamn white people. Because the second they started talking, I was like, oh, I know what you're doing, you bastards. I mean, it feels like we kind of have. I don't know if there's any other major component you want to get to. Or do you want to get to final thoughts and grades?
Yeah, let's get to final thoughts and grades. I think we've dissected the movie. I mean, we're at half the runtime of the movie already. So
Yeah.
we probably should.
Well, perfect. Well, I'll let you go first because I think I've given most of mine. So, what are your final thoughts and your grade, Paul?
Final thoughts is it's a beautifully shot movie. It's deceptively easy and simple at first. It turns into a more complicated and fraught film, especially for the protagonist. It doesn't explain everything, but it shows you don't need to go to every single bit of detail. It's a character drama set in the middle of a survival horror film, and that makes it worthwhile. And I haven't got to see lots of new movies this year because COVID. So I'm going to be relatively generous with the grade because I also want to support films like this because it's not a sprawling movie that doesn't know what it's doing. It knows what it does what it does, and it comes out just fine. So I'm going to give it a nice solid A-.
I think that's totally fair, Paul. Yeah. And I think for the most part, we're pretty much on the same page. I think, me personally, I think I would have liked a little bit more, especially when it starts to get the complexity with the friends who show up, the ones who've survived. I think I might have wanted a bit more of that. I think it could have done with a little more development. But overall, I think that this does, remarkably well for what the story is supposed to be and what the complexities are when they do show up. This film does it very, very well. And Dillard definitely, I think they need to hire him for more stuff because he clearly knows how to direct. I think he's definitely got a lot of potential to be a real big deal in anything, really. But clearly he's got the horror chops. So, and I think I also would give this an A-.
More people need to get to see it, and hopefully this podcast will convince you, listener, to go and watch it.
Yeah, well, perfect. So, and on that note, we should make sure you know about all the things. So, one big one, you can find us on all the stuffs. We're at skiffyandfanty.com. We're on Twitter at skiffyandfanty. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/skiffyandfanty. We've got a newsletter run by Stephen Geigen Miller at skiffyandfanty.com/newsletter. We also have a YouTube at youtube.com/skiffyandfanty, which is sort of semi on hiatus because the election's coming and we're all dying inside. And lastly, for Skiffy stuff, we do have a Patreon. If you'd like to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/skiffyandfanty. I would appreciate it. But other than that, I am at Sean Duke on the Twitters, and you can find me at seanduke.net. And Paul, where can folks find you?
I am Prince Justin, that's with a V, PRINCEJVSTIN on Twitter, and I have a website, www.princejustinwithAV.com. I have book reviews and stuff at Skiffy and Fanty, at Nerds of a Feather. I show up at Tor.com. I'm on SFF Audio. I am all over the internet.
True. And,
I'm a lot.
And you have a Patreon, correct?
And I have a Patreon, patreon.com/PrinceJustin where you can support my endeavors photographically, recording, and book reviews and the like.
And when you're listening to this, Paul will be either probably still in the middle of his trip, so you can expect to see some photos on his Patreon from his Utah trip, which would be very pretty.
You definitely can. So support me on Patreon and you can see the photos first.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again, Paul, for being here.
Absolutely. This was a pleasure to watch and talk to you about.
Awesome. And I will just remind people that November is coming, and given that we're still in lockdown, you're still not required to wear pants. This is from the official order of Sean, that you can, in fact, just wander around in shorts, boxers. You can go commando style, whatever makes you happy. You do not have to. Don't give them the dignity of forcing you to wear things you don't want to wear.
Word.
And on that note, awkward ending and scene.
Stay frosty.
If you would like to support this podcast, you can do so at patreon.com/skiffyandfanty. You can also find us on our website, skiffyandfanty.com, and on Twitter at skiffyandfanty. If you'd like to send us an email, you can do so at skiffyandfanty@gmail.com. The music for this episode comes from Sphere by Creo. You can find out more about their music at freemusicarchive.org.